Hello, welcome. Episode 89 of the Henry George Daily Devotional. I believe this is where I left off. Um, yeah, I think I should add to my normal introduction is if you want to know more about Georgism, consider clicking on some of the links in the description, joining the Georgism Discord server, joining the Reddit subreddit for Georgism, or reading my blog, almostinfinite.substack.com. There's also, especially if you go to almostinfinite.substack.com, about. See, maybe I make this too hard. You have to go to about, and then you can go to writings, quotes, videos on Georgism, and then there's a lot of resources that I have collected. Not, not a ton. I tried to pick my favorites. But anyway, let's get to the progress in the poverty. We are in the Indorsements and Objections, Chapter 4 of Book 8. An objection, I think I read this last time, but I'm going to reread it because it starts off this section. An objection of a different kind may, however, be made. It may be said that where political power is diffused, it is highly desirable that taxation should fall not on one class, such as landowners, but on all, in order that all who exercise political power may feel a proper interest in economical government. Taxation and representation, it will be said, cannot safely be divorced. Yeah, it would be funny for people to, I guess this was like, they shouldn't get representation if they're not being taxed. It's no taxation, no representation, not taxation without representation being the problem. But however desirable it may be to combine with political power the consciousness of public burdens, the present system certainly does not secure it. Indirect taxes are largely raised from those who pay little or nothing consciously. In the United States, the class is rapidly growing who not only feel no interest in taxation, but who have no concern in good government. In our large cities, elections are in great measure determined not by considerations of public interest, but by such influences as determined elections in Rome, when the masses had ceased to care for anything but bread and the circus. The effect of substituting for the manifold taxes now imposed a single tax on the value of land would hardly lessen the number of conscious taxpayers, for the division would hardly lessen the number of conscious taxpayers. For the division now held on speculation would much increase the number of landholders, but it would so equalize the distribution of wealth as to raise even the poorest above that condition of abject poverty in which public considerations have no weight, while it would at the same time cut down those overgrown fortunes which raise their possessors above concern in government. The dangerous classes politically are the very rich and the very poor. It is not the taxes that he is conscious of paying that gives a man a stake in the country, an interest in its government. It is the consciousness of feeling that he is an integral part of the community, that its prosperity is his prosperity and its disgrace his shame. Let but the citizen feel this. Let him be surrounded by all the influences that spring from and cluster round a comfortable home, and the community may rely upon him, even to limb or to life. Men do not vote patriotically any more than they fight patriotically because of their payment of taxes. Whatever conduces to the comfortable and independent material condition of the masses will best foster public spirit, will make the ultimate governing power more intelligent and more virtuous. Here I would mention the idea of it is the rational ignorance in our modern voting world, where when, like, I don't know, what's the population of California, the state in which I live? 39 millions. If my vote is one of 39 million, or well, there's a lot of people under the age of 18, I suppose, and a lot of people don't vote. How many people actually? Mm, California election turnout. Um, General election. Is there a total? State total. Vote by mail was 15 million. Number of eligible registered precinct voters. Holy cow, 2 million. I, I didn't realize that many more people vote by mail than by. I guess if you don't need special permission anymore to vote by mail, it is easier. Anyway, total voters is 18 millions. And so the idea is that if I'm one of 18 million, my vote doesn't really have much significance. So maybe I'll pay attention for a simple single choice like a president, but I won't really pay much attention to learning about all the different propositions or all of the state roles, um, and all of the, I don't know, other details. It is, in a sense, more rational for my own economic interests to spend that time working, or just doing other things that bring me utility, I suppose. So the idea with sortition is to basically have legislators chosen like we choose a jury. So you'd have a sortition body, which would be chosen at random from the citizenry. This would undermine uh, the all of the forces that lead us towards two political parties. It would also uh, remove the whole election cycle and well, like not the cycle, there would still be that, but it would remove the campaign industry, and it would really undermine the ability of lobbyists to lobby for um, legislation over the long term because people won't be able to guarantee that they will remain in office because you get randomly chosen, you serve, and then there's no, you're not in any way particularly likely to get chosen again. I wonder if some sortionists might not even, allow you to get chosen again. Just like, if you serve jury duty, you don't do it again. However, with sortition bodies, usually you would say that it is a purely optional role once you're chosen, and that you ought to be compensated significantly above like the mean or median wage in society. So I don't know what people say that would be, because that is very dependent on, what city you live in or something like that. Anyway, I'm not so sure I agree here with George about well, I mean, I guess I do sort of agree that when somebody feels more hopeful and more represented by their government, and that their fate is tied to its government, they would probably be more active. But I do think that I don't know, when society gets so large that some of our just systemic design seems very susceptible to manipulation. Anyway, George continues, but it may be asked if the tax on land values is so advantageous a mode of raising revenue, how is it that so many other taxes are resorted to in preference by all governments? The answer is obvious. The tax on land values is the only tax of any importance that does not distribute itself. It falls upon the owners of land, and there is no way in which they can shift the burden upon anyone else. Hence, a large and powerful class are directly interested in keeping down the tax on land values and substituting as a means for raising the required revenue taxes on other things, just as the landowners of England 200 years ago succeeded in establishing an excise which fell on all consumers, for the dues under the federal feudal tenures, which fell only on them. Yeah, they got rid of feudal tenures, and they're like, it's more democratic for everyone to pay. There is thus a definite and powerful interest opposed to the taxation of land values, but to the other taxes upon which modern governments so largely rely there is no special opposition. The ingenuity of statesmen has been exercised in devising schemes of taxation which drain the wages of labor and the earnings of capital, as the vampire bat is said to suck the lifeblood of its victim. Nearly all of these taxes are ultimately paid by that indefinable being, the consumer, and he pays them in a way which does not call his attention to the fact that he is paying a tax, pays them in such small amounts and in such insidious modes that he does not notice it, and is not likely to take the trouble to remonstrate effectually. Those who pay the money directly to the tax collector are not only not interested in opposing a tax which they so easily shift from their own shoulders, but are very frequently interested in its imposition and maintenance, as are other powerful interests which profit or expect to profit by the increase of prices which such taxes bring about. Yeah, you also want to I don't know. It's just like so funny when you hear about a lot of super wealthy people having just like, oh, they don't really get it. They don't get an income, so they dodge an income tax. And then their capital gains, they're able to defer capital gains taxes. So I was curious about that, but anyway. George continues. Nearly all of the manifold taxes by which the people of the United States are now burdened have been imposed rather with a view to private advantage than to the raising of revenue. Again, in George's time, there had yet to be, I guess it's the 16th Amendment, so there was no federal income tax at that time. Although I think a lot of states had or some amount of states had an income tax. And the great obstacle to the simplification of taxation is these private interests whose representatives cluster in the lobby whenever a reduction of taxation is proposed, to see that the taxes by which they profit are not reduced. The fastening of a protective tariff upon the United States has been due to these influences, and not to the acceptance of absurd theories of protection upon their own merits. The large revenue which the Civil War rendered necessary was the golden opportunity of these special interests, and taxes were piled up on every possible thing, not so much to raise revenue as to enable particular classes to participate in the advantages of tax gathering and tax pocketing. And since the war, these interested parties have constituted the great obstacle to the reduction of taxation. those taxes which cost the people least having, for this reason, been found easier to abolish than those taxes which cost the people most. Yeah, I wonder. It is kind of interesting to see how radically policy changes during wars. In time of desperation and upheaval. And then afterwards, some things get reverted and a lot of things don't. I know that like the World Wars, 50 years, 70 years after George, um, that's when what what taxes were implemented during, that's when the federal income tax happened, was World War One. And we never went back. Since the war, these interested parties have constituted the great and thus um, and thus even popular governments which have for their avowed principle the securing of the greatest good to the greatest number are in a most important function. They are used to secure a questionable good to a small number at the expense of a great evil to the many. Yeah, this is all feels very like, I don't know, hand wavy, like, oh yeah, governments behave bad because of these things, and you can buy it or not buy it. License taxes are generally favored by those on whom they are imposed. Now, this is something I've been complaining about recently to friends. That the American Medical Association and American Bar Association, in my version of U.S. history, it was like a bunch of smart, you know, men without a lot of land uh, were like, hey, if we create like these institutions that force lawyers or doctors have to be licensed, this way we can ensure, instead of a sort of landed gentry, we can do kind of like an IQ gentry. So we can limit, like we don't really care that if society needs 10,000 doctors, we don't really care if they need 10,000 or 20,000. We're going to cap it on 5,000 doctors, and so we'll all be in huge demand, and we'll only let the best of the best become doctors. So then it will be like unquestioned that any doctor is like super smart or something. And they do the same trick with lawyers. And so those professions end up having uh, high competition, artificially reduced membership, and artificially increased cost. And then you're also introducing all this sort of bureaucratic administration overhead. And I don't know if George exactly has a systematic way of preventing that. He does complain about special interests in here licensing. I don't know how you prevent governments from being like, yeah, we should make a regulation or a license for that. I don't know. Same sort of issues around the food and drug world. But it is weird. Some of the health blogs I read, they're always praising, like they're like the FDA allows these 20,000 substances and the EU doesn't. The EU gets it all right. So I sometimes feel like, oh, maybe I should study the EU's like equivalent of the FDA because I don't know much about it. Anyway, George says license taxes are generally favored by those on whom they are imposed, as they tend to keep others from entering the business. Yeah, this is a simpler form than a IQ tax or limitation. you just make people pay a bunch of money to get certified, then that means only the people with a bunch of money can conduct business. Uh, yeah, and what do we see right now in LA everywhere are all the little illegal taco stands because it costs way too much money to open a business or open a restaurant and get all the approved food handling and alcohol distributor licenses and all that. And those who do then need to raise their own costs if they want to stay in business. I mean, their costs are increased, and it's going to make their profit margins a lot thinner, which makes it harder to survive as a business. Imposts upon manufacturers are frequently grateful to large manufacturers for similar reasons. Yeah, imposts upon manufacturers are. I don't understand. I would say large manufacturers are frequently grateful for imposts upon manufacturers. I'm confused. I thought an impost is like a tax. Yeah. I don't know why a tax would be grateful to large manufacturers for similar reasons. I don't know. The syntax of this sentence. Syntax is the only tax I like. Let's put that on a shirt. As was seen in the opposition of the distillers, well, there's sin tax, there are sin taxes, and the land value tax. Sin tax and the land value tax. As was seen in the opposition of the distillers to the reduction of the whiskey tax. Duties on imports not only tend to give certain producers special advantages, but accrue to the benefit of importers or dealers who have large stocks on hand. And so, in the case of all such taxes, there are particular interests capable of ready organization and concerted action which favor the imposition of the tax, while in the case of a tax upon the value of land, there is a solid and sensitive interest steadily and bitterly to oppose it. But if once the truth of which I am trying to make clear is understood by the masses, it is easy to see how a union of political forces strong enough to carry it into practice becomes possible. That's the one little hopeful sentence there, because man, it's so hard to be like, there's this manipulation that can be done in the art of taxation and licensing that will favor the wealthy and powerful. So if there are wealthy and powerful, they will want to do this, and it will help the wealthy and powerful. But you've already so how do you fight against that? Like you've already sort of, the initial conditions were that they had power and wealth. How do you stop power and wealth? Especially because wealth itself is a good thing, and you don't want to just attack pure wealth. How do we bring justice? My only general optimism around the whole thing is that I don't know where I read it, but somewhere I read it that this basic idea of the sanctity of any human life sort of crept into the consciousness of all the humans across the earth, and it took a while, but once that simple idea that all men are equal, it eventually worked out that, oh, that means skin color doesn't matter. Oh, that means being male or female doesn't matter. And then maybe we get that one little core idea planted that every human born on earth deserves their share of the earth. And maybe that will eventually work its way across all of society, where then the masses really unify behind that. Anyway, so concludes today's daily devotional. Hasta lasagna. Don't get any Anya.